film sequels are notoriously bad, soul-crushingly terrible, especially when the filmmaker is so suddenly powerful that he can do anything he wants, which George Lucas was, and then some. Yet he defied expectations and managed to avoid the sophomore slump. But that was no easy task, trust us. Think you know the whole story? Think again. I'm Rob at Cinematica, and we're here to give you the inside scoop on how George Lucas created what is widely regarded as the greatest sequel of all time, The Empire Strikes Back. So sit back, grab some snacks, because Cinematica is counting down the 107 facts you should know about Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, so you can watch smarter. 1. Lucas was always an independent filmmaker at heart. Following the massive, record-breaking success of the first Star Wars, he'd hoped to become independent from Hollywood by financing The Empire Strikes Back himself and with various loans. 2. Instead of directing, Lucas decided to oversee The Empire Strikes Back as a producer, focusing more on the groundbreaking effects produced by his company, Industrial Light and Magic. 3. Lucas asked his former film professor from the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts, Irvin Kershner, to direct The Empire Strikes Back because of Kershner's focus on characters. 4. Kershner actually turned down Lucas at first, believing the sequel could never be as good as the original. Kershner's agent demanded he take the job, however, and he relented. The decision changed his life. Kershner would go on to direct huge Hollywood films like RoboCop 2 and the James Bond film Never Say Never Again, among others. 5. Lucas's original screenwriter for Empire Strikes Back, Lee Brackett, died just 1 month after finishing her draft. 6. After Brackett's death, Lucas took on the screenwriting duties himself. This draft is also where Lucas first wrote that Darth Vader is Luke's father. 7. With encouragement from Kershner, Lucas hired now legendary screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan to write the production drafts of the screenplay. Kasdan had just finished writing Raiders of the Lost Ark. 8. Even with a new screenwriter attached, Lucas was able to work in, steal elements of Flash Gordon just like he did in the original Star Wars. In The Empire Strikes Back, the most obvious homage is Cloud City, which is lifted directly from Cloud City in the film version of Flash Gordon. 9. The Luke-Leia romance was originally going to be much more prominent, with Luke flat out telling her that he loves her in the treatment. So it's likely at that point, Lucas hadn't decided that they were siblings yet. This isn't Game of Thrones after all. 10. Tons of visuals and story points were also borrowed from the Akira Kurosawa masterpiece, The Hidden Fortress. Things like the beautiful but acerbic princess and her tough rescuer stuck behind enemy lines, helped along by 2 bumbling peasants, for instance. 11. Empire is the first Star Wars movie to have an episode designation, Episode 5, precede its title in the opening crawl. Studio executives would not let Lucas put Episode 4 before A New Hope, as they feared it would confuse the audience. 12. Empire takes place 3 years after A New Hope, which is the same amount of time between the releases of the 2 movies. 13. On a completely different note, some of the most legendary lines in the Star Wars canon were improvised, including this one.
I love you.
I know.
Originally, Han was supposed to say, I love you too, but Kershner and Harrison Ford hated it, so according to Kershner, he asked Ford to improvise something, and the rest is Star Wars history. 14. Speaking of famous lines, what would you say is the single most quoted line in the history of Star Wars? Easy. Luke, I am your father. Right? Wrong. The line is actually,
No, I am your father.
15. Darth Vader's meditation chamber is called a Kabrat. 16. This movie marks the first appearance of the Imperial March, Darth Vader's legendary theme song. It plays with the reveal of Darth Vader's Super Star Destroyer. 17. Director Kershner is widely credited with pushing Lucas in The Empire Strikes Back to focus more on the human elements of the story, like the love story between Han and Leia, and the mentor-mentee relationship between Yoda and Luke. Maybe this is why The Empire Strikes Back has the lowest body count of the entire Star Wars saga. Only 30 kills. 18. Jim Henson, a friend of George Lucas, was offered the role of Yoda. Busy with the Great Muppet Caper, Henson turned it down. He recommended Frank Oz for the role, who was ultimately cast. Oz is most famous as the voice of both Cookie Monster and Miss Piggy. 19. Jeremy Bulloch, who played Boba Fett, was cast solely because the costume happened to fit him perfectly. Much like quite a few other characters, he was cast because of his size. He didn't have to do a reading or a screen test in order to win the role. 20. Yaphet Kotto was offered the role of Lando Calrissian. He turned it down because he believed he would be killed off and it would be difficult for him to find work after that. Billy D. Williams, who had previously auditioned for the role of Han Solo, then won the role. 21. Wedge Antilles was not originally scripted to appear in this film. It was out of an intense fan interest that prompted George Lucas to include him. In a weird bit of 6 Degrees, Dennis Lawson, who played Wedge Antilles, is Ewan McGregor's uncle. Ewan McGregor, as you know, plays the young Obi-Wan Kenobi in episodes 1, 2, and 3. 22. Due to a recent eye operation during principal photography, it was unclear if Sir Alec Guinness would return as Obi-Wan Kenobi. He finally did agree and worked just one day on the film. Arriving on set at 8:30 a.m. and wrapping by 1 p.m., he was paid 1/4 of a percentage point of the film's gross, which ended up being worth millions of dollars. 23. Principal photography lasted over 180 days, the longest shoot of any of the Star Wars movies. It was beset with delays in part because of the Norwegian weather, and in part because the special effects were often filmed in camera. 24. While filming in Norway, they encountered the worst winter storm in 50 years, and on occasion the crew were unable to exit their hotel. The scene where Luke wanders through the snow after escaping the Wampa Cave was shot by sending Mark Hamill outside into the cold, while Kirshner and the cameraman filmed from inside the hotel's front hall. 25. Mark Hamill wasn't the only cast or crew member put to the test. John Barry, who had won an Academy Award for his production design on the first Star Wars, sadly collapsed on set and died, struck with undiagnosed meningitis. 26. Episode 5 introduces us to the cult hero, bounty hunter Boba Fett. Updated versions of the original Star Wars, however, remember, Lucas likes to tinker, contained a digitally added Boba Fett en route to meeting Jabba the Hutt. He stops and looks directly at the camera in the most recent special edition of the original, for reasons no one is really sure of. 27. Boba Fett was such a small character that his first appearance was in the Star Wars Holiday Special, not in the original Star Wars. In fact, he only has 4 lines in the original trilogy, and we never see his face. Yet somehow he has become a beloved character in the Star Wars canon. 28. Lucas and Star Wars had some famous fans. Stephen King visited the set while The Shining was filming next door. He must have been impressed by director Irving Kershner, who was nicknamed Kirsch, because King would later name a character Mrs. Kirsch, and have her speak in a similar pattern to Yoda. More on that later. One important distinction, Mrs. Kirsch was a witch who terrorized little kids. Kershner, by all accounts, was a nice guy. 29. But maybe Stephen King was taking a jab at Kershner after a fire on the set of Empire destroyed some of the sets for The Shining. Lucas and Kershner actually had to donate some of their allotted space so The Shining could keep filming. 30. Except for the scene in which he was being sucked out of a Cloud City window, Mark Hamill did all of his own stunts. No good deed goes unpunished. 31. Mark Hamill claims he had to bang his head 16 times on the ceiling of Yoda's hut before director Irving Kershner was satisfied. 32. And the snake that Luke pulls from his spaceship was harmless, as in not poisonous, but it did bite him one take. 33.
Yoda facts we give you now?
Sorry, I had to do that at least once. You already know Yoda was played by legendary voice artist Frank Oz, but you probably didn't know that director Kershner bought so fully into Oz's puppeteering of Yoda that he would often direct the puppet. Oz claims that he often had to remind Kershner to speak to him instead. 34. For his design of Yoda, makeup artist Stuart Freeborn said he used his own face as a model, but modeled Yoda's wrinkles on the wrinkles of Albert Einstein to subconsciously suggest exceptional intelligence. 35. Sets for Dagobah, Yoda's home turf, were built 5 feet above the stage floor, allowing Frank Oz to crawl underneath to hold up the Yoda puppet. This setup, however, presented communication problems for Frank Oz, who played Yoda, as he was underneath the stage and often unable to hear the director and actor Mark Hamill above. 36. Speaking of sets, for all the special effects wizardry Lucas and Industrial Light and Magic employed, many of the backgrounds, for instance the Imperial Docking Bay and the landing pad in Cloud City, were created by a process called matte painting, basically an early form of green screen where the green screen is removed and replaced by, you guessed it, a painting. If you look closely, you can usually pick out the matte painted backgrounds, especially in the remastered digital versions of the film, where the older technique stands out a bit more. 37. If you look closely, you'll notice the chasm deep in the heart of Bespin, below where Luke and Vader have their lightsaber duel, was created using a matte painting. In real life, there are huge safety mats just below Mark Hamill that were covered in post-production by matte paintings. 38.
The AT-ATs, or All-Terrain Armored Transports, or Imperial Walkers, or AT-ATs if you believe in pronouncing things incorrectly, were inspired by the machines from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and based on the prehistoric creature called a Beluchitherium.
They were not, as some rumors say, based on the dock machinery at the Port of Oakland. 39. Is there anything more iconic than having one name? Madonna, Gandhi, Elvis, Shakespeare, and Minch? That's what Lucas originally wanted to call Yoda. Some accounts say he wanted to call the character Minch Yoda. Regardless, 2 lessons here. Rewrites are your friends, and stick with one name if you want to be a legend. 40. Yoda's species is, to this day, unnamed. Let's see, maybe there's a clue in Lucas's original vision for Yoda, which was a blue, gnome-like creature with pointy toes. Nope, no idea. 41. Yoda's iconic manner of speech, of course, adds to the legend. To be specific, Yoda's speech is generally in object, subject, verb order. Very few languages on Earth, outside of the Amazon River Basin, use this sentence structure, opting instead typically for the subject, verb, object structure. 42. Yoda is the Sanskrit word for warrior, which is interesting because Yoda is presented at first as more of a wise old mentor than a battle-hardened fighter. The name and its meaning are a fascinating clue to what we will later see from the calm and composed Yoda. 43. The "there is another" line served a few purposes. Firstly, it was to allude to Luke's long-lost sibling, who ended up being Leia, but was once imagined as another Jedi in training. Secondly, it was to create suspense in the fact that even if Luke died, then someone else could still fight Vader, thus raising the stakes of their encounter. 44. It's never stated how long Luke spent training with Yoda, or how long the Millennium Falcon took to get to Bespin without a hyperdrive, but theorists have placed it somewhere between a week and 3 weeks, which in either case is probably not long enough to really master the Force. 45. George Lucas was so impressed by Frank Oz's performance as Yoda that he spent tens of thousands of dollars on an advertising campaign to try to get him nominated for the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Lucas's campaign ultimately failed because it was felt that a puppeteer wasn't an actor. Lucas felt this was unfair to Oz, who actually didn't mind. 46. Speaking of fan favorites, let's go back to Boba Fett. Did you know we've already said his name more times in this 107 than it's mentioned in the actual Star Wars movies? Fett may be a fan favorite, but his name is never said on screen. Not once. He's only referred to as the Bounty Hunter. 47. Jeremy Bulloch, you'll remember he's the actor playing Boba Fett, is seen out of his mask and character as an Imperial officer. He brings Lando, Leia, Chewie, and C-3PO to Vader's shuttle. 48. Lucas did not predict that Fett would be so popular. He later said that if he had known, he would have made the character's death more exciting. Wanting to give the popular character some interesting backstory, Lucas at one point considered depicting Vader and Fett as brothers in the prequel films, but discounted it as too, quote, hokey. 49. Bulloch based his performance on Clint Eastwood's portrayal of the man with no name in A Fistful of Dollars. Similar to the Western icon, Bulloch cradled the gun prop, made the character seem always ready to shoot, slightly tilted his head, and modeled how he stands on Eastwood's movie posters. 50. Fun Easter egg. Sound editor Ben Burt helped Boba Fett with his homage to Clint Eastwood's westerns. He added the sound of jangling spurs to Fett's appearance in Cloud City. 51. Burt, you may remember from last week's 107, came up with the amazing sound effects for the original Star Wars, utilizing everything from old radio tubes to camels whining. In Empire, the Tauntaun's voices came from an Asian sea otter, pitched down. 52. Burt also borrowed noises from elephants. The whooshing sound made by TIE fighters is actually an elongated sound of an elephant wailing. 53. Like on any massive production, mistakes are inevitable. During the evacuation of Cloud City, you can see an extra running with what appears to be an ice cream maker. The extra has since been given an elaborate backstory, and the supposed ice cream maker is meant to be a database of contacts within the rebellion. 54. If Han and Leia look really happy upon entering Cloud City, it's because they're a little bit drunk. They spent the previous night partying with the Rolling Stones after Eric Idle invited them over to the house Fisher was staying at. They knew there was an early call the next day, but decided to get what they wanted anyway. 55. Originally in the asteroid scene, one of the asteroids was actually a shoe. Rumor has it that George Lucas asked the special effects team to redo the scene so many times that they got annoyed and one of them threw in their shoe. 56. According to legend, another one of the asteroids is actually a potato. 57. Mark Hamill's face was scarred in a motor accident that occurred between the filming of A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Despite reports stating otherwise, the scene in which Luke gets knocked out by the Wampa was not added specifically to explain this change in Hamill's face. Lucas admitted that the scene helped the situation, though he felt that Luke's time fighting in the rebellion was sufficient explanation. 58. When asked if he would have recasted Hamill had he died in the car accident, Lucas said that he would have brought in a long-lost sibling who would have also had the Force to take his place. 59. Des Webb, who played the Wampa, was 7'4" and had to walk on 2.5-foot stilts in the snow. This caused him to frequently fall over during tapings. 60. As a result of Webb's difficulties, the Wampa is only seen in tight shots in the film's original release. Shots of the full-body suit were added later in the 1997 release after a more practical suit was made. 61. Kirshner decided that for this movie, members of the Rebel Alliance would speak with American accents, while the Imperial officers would speak with British accents. He did this to make the story analogous to the American Revolution. However, most of the supporting actors that appeared as Rebel personnel on Hoth are actually British actors, and Kirshner had to redub several of these scenes with American voices in post-production. 62. Even when things go right, making a blockbuster film can be difficult. Carrie Fisher, standing at 5'1", is about a foot shorter than Harrison Ford, who is 6'1". Carrie Fisher stood on a box for many of her scenes with Harrison Ford in order to make up for the height difference and have her appear in the frame with him. 63. Most of the Rebel ground troops in the Hoth battle were Norwegian extras. Because they didn't speak any English, 2nd Unit Director Peter MacDonald had to mime what he wanted them to do by pointing in the direction of the enemy, which wasn't visible during shooting, and demonstrating the recoil motion he wanted for the blaster rifles. 64. Speaking of Hoth, the snow on the miniature Hoth set, which was needed for special effects shots, was made of baking soda and microglass bubbles. 65. Luke finds himself upside down 3 times in the film. At the beginning, the Wampa Cave, in the middle, training on Dagobah, and at the end, below Cloud City. He uses the Force each time. This would be a fun time to remind you that Mark Hamill did all of his own stunts in the film, meaning he had to film while hanging upside down for days. 66. 16 different models of R2-D2 were used in filming. 2 were remote controlled, and 3 were dummy versions that could be damaged when necessary. 67. The lightsaber fight scenes set in the carbon freezing chamber tend to focus on Luke rather than Darth Vader. This is because during many of the shots, Bob Anderson, Vader's fight double, was not wearing the Darth Vader helmet, as doing so made it difficult for him to breathe. 68. During the carbonite freezing chamber scene, both Jeremy Bulloch and David Prowse had to remove their helmets every 3 minutes because the steam from the floor made their costumes hot and heavy. 69. Great filmmakers roll with the punches, and Kirshner was no different. To save money, the scenes where R2-D2 was submerged in the mud pool were shot at Lucas's home in his unfinished swimming pool. Most of the crew were hidden under the water, while Lucas shot almost the entire sequence himself. 70. Mark Hamill's wife gave birth to their first son early one morning during production, forcing Mark to go straight from the hospital to shooting. This was the day they filmed the shots of Luke hanging by the weather vane below Cloud City on Bespin. 71. Having Han Solo frozen in carbonite was, at least in part, due to the fact that they were not sure that Harrison Ford would return for a 3rd film, having refused to sign a 3-picture deal. Ford even requested George Lucas to kill off Solo, claiming the character had already played its part. But Lucas refused, saying that he still had a heroic part for Han Solo to play in Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. 72. In certain shots of the Rebels' hangar, the filmmakers hired children as extras. The reason for this was that the actor's short stature would make the hangar appear larger than it actually was. 73. John Ratzenberger of Cheers and Pixar fame cameos. He plays Bryn Durlin, the deck officer who tells Han not to go look for Luke. 74. During the filming of the Battle of Hoth, the Echo-based troops were actually played by Norwegian mountain rescue skiers. In exchange for their participation in the film, Lucasfilm made a donation to the Norwegian Red Cross. 75. Among the Norwegian extras in the film, some of them would end up becoming quite famous in their country. One of them, Tom Egeland, would later become the chief news editor for one of Norway's largest TV networks and a critically acclaimed mystery writer. 76. Kirshner and Ford improvised the scene where Han is hit with the toolbox and hits the control panel. 77. The carbon freezing chamber is the only time in the original trilogy that Darth Vader and C-3PO can be seen on screen together. 78. The name of 4LOM, one of the bounty hunters listening to Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back, means for love of money. 79. Darth Vader sarcastically inviting Han to dinner is the only time in any of the Star Wars films that Vader speaks directly to Han. 80. As in the previous Star Wars film, and in all the others to come, the line, "I have a bad feeling about this," is spoken by one of the characters. In this film, it is said by Leia when the Falcon lands inside an asteroid/giant space slug. 81. The real name for the space slug is an exogorth. Little known fact, according to Star Wars lore, exogorths eat energy fields in spaceships, live in caves on asteroids, and reproduce asexually, splitting into 2 independent exogorths. 82. Han Solo is the only non-Jedi/Sith in the entire original trilogy to ever wield a lightsaber. You'll remember early in the film, after he discovers the freezing Luke, he uses Luke's lightsaber to cut open the Tauntaun's belly to keep himself and Luke warm while waiting to be rescued. 83. Empire Strikes Back is the only movie in the Star Wars series that doesn't have a scene on the planet Tatooine. 84. Rebel Alliance General Riken says, "Send rogues 10 and 11 to Sector 38. This is a subtle reference to Lucas's THX 1138. 85. The voiceover line, "The first transport is away," during the Rebel evacuation is actually delivered by Mark Hamill, disguising his voice. 86. Remember how a lot of George Lucas's early ideas fall somewhere between boring to terrible, but his rewrites usually save the day? Well, the evil emperor, Darth Vader's boss, makes his film debut in The Empire Strikes Back, but he was originally supposed to be a she, actually a woman-chimpanzee hybrid, but Lucas thought better of it. The terrifying Ian McDiarmid went on to play the Emperor in The Return of the Jedi in subsequent films. 87. Originally, George Lucas envisioned a trip to Darth Vader's home during Empire. He would have resided in a big Gothic castle surrounded by lava and full of living gargoyles which Vader kept as pets. Okay, so some of Lucas's early ideas were pretty awesome. 88. The battle between the rebels and Imperial forces on Hoth was played into the story by Lucas because originally, Empire didn't have a great closing battle. Lucas felt the sequel needed to have the same wow factor that the Death Star provided in the original, so he added the big fight. 89. But no talk of battles would be complete without deconstructing one of the most famous movie battles of all time. Luke versus Vader, father versus son, good versus evil, with two characters essentially sword fighting on a catwalk above an abyss. Luke and the rest of the filmmaking team went to great lengths to protect the secret twist, the Vader is Luke's father, by giving actors false dialogue that would be dubbed over later. David Prowse, for instance, was given script pages requiring him to say the fake line, "Obi-Wan killed your father," which he spoke during filming. 90. Mark Hamill did not learn of the plot point until just before the scene was filmed. 91. Until the film's premiere, only Lucas, his editors, director Irvin Kershner, Hamill, and James Earl Jones knew what would really be said. 92. George Lucas couldn't escape the challenges of making a modern blockbuster. His health and marriage fell apart, as did his relationship with his longtime producer, Gary Kurtz. Though the film was an enormous critical and commercial success, Lucas would never work with Kurtz again, and his marriage dissolved a few years later. 93. By the end of the shoot, over 120 hours of film had been used. 94. Lucas went way over budget on Empire and had to go back to 20th Century Fox for more money. The negotiations were so intense, Alan Ladd Jr., the executive who brought Star Wars into 20th Century Fox, quit, and Lucas took his next project to Paramount in spite. That project, by the way, was Raiders of the Lost Ark. 95. Empire does not have subtitles for the alien languages, making it one of the only two Star Wars films not to provide subtitles. The other is Revenge of the Sith. 96. There are no Jedi mind tricks used in The Empire Strikes Back. 97. Lucas hated the original cut of the film from director Irvin Kershner and re-edited the film himself. It tested so poorly that the two were forced to combine their versions of the film to create what you see now. Or what you saw before the multiple re-releases from Lucas over the last 30 years. 98. The world premiere of The Empire Strikes Back was held on May 17, 1980, at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., as a special Children's World Premiere event. 99. Legendary poster designer Drew Struzan designed the iconic poster for Empire, along with the other Star Wars posters and Indiana Jones posters. Han and Leia's pose in the poster was modeled after Clark Gable and Vivian Lee's pose on the Gone with the Wind poster. 100. At first, Empire Strikes Back got mixed reviews. It's fair to say that the reaction was meh. Over time, however, The Empire Strikes Back has become regarded as one of the greatest sequels ever made, and even one of the greatest American films ever made. 101. Legendary film critic Roger Ebert raved about Empire, saying, "The Empire Strikes Back is the best of the three Star Wars films, and the most thought-provoking. After the space opera cheerfulness of the original film, this one plunges into darkness and even despair, and surrenders more completely to the underlying mystery of the story." When Ebert speaks, the other critics listen. Eventually. 102. Empire was originally released in 70mm prints, which were only able to screen in cities and suburbs with advanced screening capabilities. 70mm frames from those prints are now collector's items. 103. Empire Strikes Back was the highest grossing film of 1980. 104. Empire is currently the 12th highest grossing film in history, pulling in $538 million in 1980s dollars. That's over $1.5 billion in 2015 dollars. 105. Everyone thought Lucas was crazy investing his money into Empire, but within 3 months of the film's release, he made it back and was distributing $5 million in bonuses to cast, crew, and employees. 106. George Lucas initially called this the worst Star Wars film and apologized for its existence. In 2010, the film was chosen for the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress due to its significance to American culture, just like the original Star Wars. 107. The film won an Oscar for Best Sound and a special award for visual effects. It was also nominated for Best Art Direction, Set Direction, and Best Original Score. Thanks for watching Cinematica's 107 Facts You Should Know About Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Like what you just saw? We've got 107 facts you should know about Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, coming out next week. And if you love obsessing over movies and TV, be sure to tell your friends. Like this video and subscribe to Cinematica, where we help you watch smarter.